The message arrived on every screen across the Galactic Confederacy at the same moment. It did not ask for permission. It simply appeared, forcing itself into military computers, civilian broadcasts, and private communication devices. The face on the screen belonged to a man with cold eyes and a cruel smile. He called himself the Voice of the Forgotten, and he had taken something very precious. Princess Alendra Valshora was the only daughter of the Therian Empress. She was young, barely 20 cycles old, but she carried the weight of 100 years of conflict on her shoulders. Her marriage to the heir of the Corvan Federation would end a cold war that had cost millions of lives. She was hope given human form. And now she was gone. The terrorist had not simply kidnapped her. That would have been too easy. Instead, he had placed her inside the Obsidian Vault, an ancient structure that orbited a dead star called Kethros 9. The vault was not built by any species that still lived. It was created by beings called the Architects, who had disappeared from the universe 11,000 years ago. They left behind wonders that no one could understand, and the Obsidian Vault was the greatest of them all. No weapon had ever scratched its surface. No scanner had ever seen inside its walls. The only way in was through a single door that had remained closed since before most civilizations learned to build fire. The Voice of the Forgotten did not explain how he had gotten the princess inside. He only explained what would happen if his demands were not met. 3 colonized systems. Billions of people. Surrender them to his control, or the princess would die when Kethros 9 completed its next rotation around the galactic center. That gave the Confederacy 30 standard days. The Confederacy responded with everything it had. The Knights of the Void arrived first. They were legends made flesh, warriors whose names were spoken with reverence on 1,000 worlds. Each knight was the product of genetic engineering that had been refined over centuries. Their bodies were stronger than steel, faster than thought, and more durable than starship armor. They wore powered suits that could crack open moons, and they carried weapons that burned with the fire of small suns. Commander Theron Blackwood led the assault. He was 7 feet tall, with silver eyes that had been designed to see across the entire electromagnetic spectrum. He had killed pirates, monsters, and enemy soldiers beyond counting. He had never failed a mission in his 40 years of service. As his ship approached the Obsidian Vault, he felt the familiar calm that came before battle. The vault hung in space like a black wound against the stars. It was roughly spherical, perhaps 50 kilometers across, and its surface absorbed light rather than reflecting it. Looking at it hurt the eyes in a way that was hard to describe. It was wrong, somehow. It did not belong in this universe. All units, Blackwood said into his communicator. Begin assault pattern Alpha. Full weapons release authorized. 17 knights in their assault pods screamed toward the vault. They fired everything they had. Plasma lances that could slice through battleship armor. Antimatter warheads that could level cities. Focused gravity beams that could tear apart the fabric of space itself. The firepower they unleashed in those first 30 seconds could have destroyed a small planet. The vault did not react. The weapons struck barriers that appeared from nowhere. Shields made of something that was not quite matter and not quite energy. The explosions were bright enough to blind sensors across the system, but when the light faded, the vault remained exactly as it had been. Not a single mark. Not a single scratch. The door had not even changed temperature. Increase power, Blackwood ordered. Target the door mechanism directly. They tried again. And again. For 6 hours, the greatest warriors in the galaxy threw everything they had at the ancient structure. They tried to cut through the walls. They tried to drill into the surface. They tried to force the door open with shape charges and gravity manipulation. Nothing worked. Then the vault responded. No one saw exactly what happened. One moment, Night Lieutenant Vera Santos was positioning her pod for another attack run. The next moment, her pod simply ceased to exist. There was no explosion, no debris, no warning. She was there, and then she was not. 16 more knights died in the next hour. Some vanished like Santos. Others were torn apart by forces that the survivors could not describe. One knight reported that space itself had folded around his pod, crushing it into a point smaller than an atom. His screaming transmission cut off mid-word. Blackwood called the retreat. He had no choice. His forces had been reduced to a handful of survivors, and they had accomplished nothing. As his damaged ship limped away from the vault, he stared at the door that had defeated him. It had not even opened. It had not even tried to fight back. The vault had simply swatted his knights away like insects, using defenses that activated automatically. The intelligence that built this place had not bothered to wake up. The news spread quickly across the Confederacy. The Knights of the Void, the greatest warriors in known space, had failed. They had lost 17 of their finest soldiers, and the door remained closed. 24 days remained until the deadline. People began to panic. If the Knights could not succeed, who could? Some spoke of surrender, of giving the terrorist what he wanted. Others spoke of war, of hunting down every member of his organization and burning their worlds to ash. But none of that would save the princess. On a small cargo ship traveling through a distant sector, a woman named Elena Vasquez heard the news on a broken view screen she had been meaning to fix. She watched the footage of the Knights' assault, saw their weapons splash uselessly against the ancient barriers, and felt a distant sadness for the soldiers who had died. Then she went back to work. She had an engine coupling that was making a strange noise, and strange noises always meant trouble. She did not think about princesses or ancient vaults or galactic politics. Those were problems for important people, and Elena had never been important. She did not know that she would soon become the most important person in the galaxy. She did not know that the door which had defeated the mightiest warriors in existence was waiting for her, and her alone. She only knew that the coupling needed attention, and that she was very good at fixing things that were broken. The engine stopped making its strange noise. Elena smiled, wiped the grease from her hands, and went to find some dinner. The universe continued to turn, the deadline continued to approach, and the obsidian vault continued to wait in the darkness between the stars. The clerics of the Ascending Path had studied the architects for 3,000 years. They lived on monastery worlds at the edges of known space, where the ancient ruins were thickest and the whispers of the past were loudest. They believed that the architects had not died. They believed that those ancient beings had simply moved beyond physical existence, becoming something close to gods. And they believed that their technology could be commanded by the power of the mind. High Cleric Morath was 700 years old. His species lived for millennia, and he had spent most of his long life learning to touch the universe with his thoughts. He could move objects without hands. He could read surface thoughts from minds around him. He could project his consciousness across vast distances, seeing and feeling things that his physical body could never reach. When the Confederacy asked for his help, he gathered his 12 most powerful disciples and traveled to Kethros 9. They arrived 8 days after the Knights' defeat. The wreckage of the failed assault still floated around the vault, twisted metal and frozen bodies that served as a warning to anyone else who might try force. Morath looked at the destruction and felt nothing but pity. The Knights had tried to break down a door with hammers. He would try to ask it to open. The clerics established themselves in a meditation chamber aboard their ship. They sat in a circle, hands joined, minds linked. Morath led them in the ancient chants that focused their psychic energy, building their collective power into something far greater than any single mind could achieve. Then they reached out, The vault was cold. That was the first thing Morath felt when his consciousness touched its surface. It was cold in a way that had nothing to do with temperature. It was the cold of empty space, the cold of time beyond measuring, the cold of something that had existed before warmth was invented. But beneath that cold, something stirred. The intelligence was vast. Morath had touched many minds in his long life, from simple animals to beings of pure energy. But this was different. This was like standing at the edge of an ocean and trying to understand the water. The mind inside the vault was so large that Morath could only perceive a tiny fraction of it, like seeing a single wave and trying to imagine the entire sea. He pushed deeper. His disciples supported him, lending him their strength. Together, they pressed against the sleeping consciousness, trying to find the part of it that controlled the door dot, and then the intelligence noticed them. Morath had no words for what happened next. It was not an attack. It was simply attention. The vast mind turned a tiny part of itself toward the clerics, examining them the way a person might examine an insect crawling across their hand. Morath felt himself being read, understood, and dismissed in the span of a single heartbeat. He tried to speak to it. He projected images of the princess, of the peace treaty, of the billions of lives that hung in the balance. He begged it to open the door, to show mercy, to remember what it meant to be alive. The intelligence did not respond. It simply waited, as if expecting something from him that he did not know how to give. Morath pushed harder. He gathered every scrap of psychic power he possessed and demanded that the door open. He commanded it. He willed it with every fiber of his being. 3 of his disciples died instantly. Their brains simply stopped working, overwhelmed by something that Morath could not see or understand. He felt their deaths like physical blows, and he pulled back in horror. The remaining clerics broke the link, gasping and crying and clutching their heads. What happened? One of them whispered. Morath stared at the vault through the viewport. His ancient hands were shaking. "It is not a door," he said quietly. "It is a question, and we do not know the language." The clerics left the next day. They had no more answers than the knights, and they had lost 3 of their wisest members. Morath would spend the rest of his long life trying to understand what he had touched inside the vault, but he would never find the answer. Some things were simply beyond even the most powerful minds. The scientific consortium arrived on the 15th day. They were not warriors or mystics. They were thinkers, researchers, beings who believed that every problem had a solution if you studied it long enough. They brought ships full of equipment, computers that filled entire cargo holds, and the greatest scientific minds from 100 different worlds. Dr. Yevon Strahl was their leader. She was a human woman, 60 years old, with gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She had spent her career studying architect technology, and she had learned more about those ancient beings than anyone else alive. She was also completely certain that she could solve the puzzle of the Obsidian Vault. For 2 weeks, her team worked without rest. They scanned the vault with every instrument they had. They analyzed the composition of its surface, the patterns of its energy signatures, the mathematical relationships hidden in its architecture. They built computer models that tried to simulate how the door might work. They argued and debated and tested theory after theory. The results were confusing. The door seemed to operate on principles that did not exist in normal physics. Some of the scientists believed it was connected to dimensions beyond the 4 that most beings experienced. Others believed it was alive, a biological mechanism disguised as metal and stone. Still others believed it was a simulation, a projection of a door that only became real under specific conditions. Dr. Strahl listened to all of their theories. She studied all of their data. And on the 22nd day, she stood before the Confederacy Council and admitted defeat. "We cannot open this door," she said. "We do not understand how it works. We may never understand." The architects were so far beyond us that their simplest technology looks like magic to our eyes. I am sorry. The council fell into chaos. 8 days remained. The knights had failed. The clerics had failed. The scientists had failed. The princess was trapped behind a door that no one could open. And there was nothing anyone could do. On a cargo ship that had just arrived to deliver supplies to the scientific base camp, Elena Vasquez finished her shift and wandered toward a viewport. She had heard the news about the scientists' failure. Everyone had. The whole galaxy was watching the obsidian vault, waiting for a miracle that would never come. Elena looked at the vault. She looked at the door that had defeated warriors, mystics, and geniuses. She tilted her head to one side, the way she always did when something caught her attention. Huh, she said to herself. That's weird. She stared at the door for a long time, trying to figure out what was bothering her. Then her shift supervisor called her name and she went back to work. But she could not stop thinking about what she had seen. Something about that door was not right. Something simple. Something that everyone else had missed. She just could not figure out what it was. Elena Vasquez had been invisible her entire life. She was born on a colony world called New Monterey, a dusty planet at the edge of human space where nothing important ever happened. Her parents were farmers. Her grandparents were farmers. Her whole family had been farmers for as long as anyone could remember. But Elena had never been interested in growing things. She was interested in fixing them. She built her first machine when she was 6 years old. It was a simple thing, just a water pump made from scrap metal and old parts, but it worked perfectly. By the time she was 12, she was repairing farm equipment for the whole settlement. By 16, she had taken apart and rebuilt the colony's only ground transport vehicle, making it run better than it had when it was new. Everyone said she had a gift, but gifts did not matter much on New Monterey. There were no universities, no technical schools, no opportunities for a girl who was good with machines. When Elena turned 18, she left her home and found work on a cargo ship called the Wandering Star. That was 25 years ago. She had been a ship mechanic ever since. The Wandering Star was not a famous ship. It was not fast or powerful or beautiful. It was a medium-sized freighter that hauled cargo between colonies, making just enough money to keep flying. The crew was small, just 7 people, and they had been together for so long that they felt like family. Elena was the oldest among them, and she was the only one who could keep the ship's aging engines running. She was good at her job. More than good. Over the years, she had developed a sense for machines that she could not explain. She could hear when something was wrong, feel it in the vibrations of a deck plate or the rhythm of a power coupling. Other mechanics used scanners and diagnostic tools. Elena just listened. The Wandering Star had been hired to bring supplies to the scientific base camp near Kethros 9. It was a simple job, just dropping off food and equipment. But the pay was excellent because no one else wanted to go anywhere near the obsidian vault. The crew was nervous, but Elena was not. She did not believe in curses or bad luck. She believed in machines, and machines always made sense if you paid attention. On the 23rd day before the deadline, Elena was sitting in the base camp's cafeteria, eating a meal that tasted like cardboard. Around her, scientists were arguing about dimensional physics and quantum mechanics. She did not understand most of what they were saying. She had never been to school past the age of 12, and the words they used meant nothing to her. But she could not stop thinking about the door. She had looked at it again that morning, through one of the station's high-powered viewports. The scientists had enhanced the image, making it possible to see details that were invisible to the naked eye. And the more Elena looked, the more certain she became that something was wrong. Not wrong in a complicated way. Not wrong in a way that required advanced physics to understand. Wrong in a simple way, a mechanical way, the kind of wrong that Elena had seen 1,000 times in her career. She finished her meal and went to find Dr. Strahl. The scientist was in her laboratory, surrounded by holographic displays showing data that Elena could not read. She looked tired and frustrated, like someone who had been fighting a battle they knew they could not win. When Elena knocked on the door frame, Strahl looked up with irritation. "Can I help you?" "I'm the mechanic from the cargo ship," Elena said. "I wanted to ask about the door." "The door is not a mechanical problem," Strahl said dismissively. "It operates on principles that you would not understand. Please, I'm very busy." Elena did not leave. "Have you looked at the left hinge?" Strahl blinked. "The what?" "The left hinge. The big mechanism on the left side of the door. I've been looking at it, and something seems off. The angle is wrong." For a moment, Strahl just stared at her. Then she laughed, a harsh sound that held no humor. "That mechanism is not a hinge. It is an 11,000-year-old piece of technology that we barely understand. It may be a power source, or a dimensional anchor, or something we do not have words for. It is certainly not a simple hinge." "It looks like a hinge to me," Elena said. "You are a cargo ship mechanic." Strahl's voice was cold now. "I have spent my entire career studying the architects. I have published hundreds of papers. I have more degrees than you have years of education. With respect, I think I know more about this door than you do." Elena nodded slowly. She had heard this kind of thing before. People with fancy titles often thought that made them smarter than everyone else. But Elena had learned something important in her years of fixing things. The universe did not care about titles. It only cared about what was true. "Can I borrow a shovel?" she asked. "Absolutely not. That structure is dangerous. We have lost people to its defenses." "The defenses only activate when you attack it," Elena said. "I'm not going to attack anything. I just want to look at the hinge." Strahl shook her head. "Request denied. Please, leave." Elena left. But she did not go back to her ship. Instead, she went to the hangar bay where the maintenance shuttles were kept. She had noticed earlier that the security systems were standard models, the same kind she had been bypassing for 20 years, when she needed parts that were not officially available. 6 hours later, while the scientists slept, Elena launched a shuttle toward the obsidian vault. She brought only 2 things with her: a toolbox and a can of synthetic lubricant. The flight took 30 minutes. As she approached the vault, she half expected to be destroyed like the knights, vaporized by defenses that she could not see. But nothing happened. Her shuttle landed on the surface of the vault without incident, its small feet touching the black material that had resisted every weapon in the galaxy. Elena opened the airlock and stepped outside. The vault surface was cold beneath her boots, but not dangerously so. Her suit's sensors showed a thin atmosphere, enough to carry sound. That was strange. The scientists had said the vault was in a vacuum dot. She walked toward the door. It took her 10 minutes to reach it, crossing a landscape that was completely flat and completely featureless. The door loomed before her, 30 meters tall, covered in symbols that glowed faintly in colors she did not recognize. Elena ignored the symbols. She walked to the left side of the door, to the mechanism that Dr. Strahl had insisted was not a hinge. It was a hinge. Elena was certain of that now. It was the biggest, most complicated hinge she had ever seen, but it was still just a hinge. And something was wrong with it. She pressed her gloved hand against the metal and listened. There, deep inside the mechanism, a faint vibration, a tiny imperfection in the rhythm. Something was stuck. Elena smiled. She finally understood. The door was not locked. It was not sealed by ancient technology or dimensional barriers. It was simply jammed. A tiny piece of the hinge mechanism had shifted out of position, probably due to 11,000 years of micrometeorite impacts and thermal expansion. The tolerance was off by less than a millimeter, but that was enough to freeze the entire door. The greatest warriors in the galaxy had tried to break it down. The wisest mystics had tried to command it open. The smartest scientists had tried to decode its secrets. And all along, it had just been stuck. Elena opened her toolbox and took out her can of lubricant. It was a simple thing, just synthetic oil designed to reduce friction in mechanical systems. She had used it 1,000 times on 1,000 different machines. She found a gap in the hinge mechanism and applied a single drop. Then she waited. The oil was black in the dim light, a single drop clinging to the edge of the gap before slowly sliding down into the mechanism. Elena watched it disappear into the ancient metal, swallowed by machinery that was older than human civilization. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then she felt it. A vibration ran through the hinge, so faint that she might have imagined it. But Elena had spent her whole life listening to machines, and she knew the difference between imagination and reality. Something was moving deep inside the mechanism, shifting in ways that had not been possible for 11,000 years. She stepped back from the hinge and looked up at the door. It was still closed, still covered in those strange glowing symbols, still as imposing as it had been since before her species learned to walk upright. But something had changed. The air felt different now, charged with possibility. The door shuddered. Dust fell from its surface, tiny particles that had accumulated over millennia drifting down like gray snow. Elena heard a sound, a deep groaning that she felt in her bones more than her ears. The metal was moving, adjusting, remembering what it was supposed to do. And then, slowly, impossibly, the door began to open. It swung inward on hinges that worked perfectly now that the obstruction had been cleared. The motion was smooth and silent, as if the door weighed nothing at all despite its massive size. Light spilled out from the opening, a soft golden glow that was warm and welcoming. Elena stood there for a long time, staring at the opening that had defeated armies and scholars alike. She probably should have been celebrating. She had just done something that the greatest heroes in the galaxy could not accomplish. But she did not feel like a hero. She felt like a mechanic who had fixed a stuck door, nothing more. She activated her communicator. "This is Elena Vasquez, maintenance technician from the cargo ship Wandering Star. The door is open. Someone might want to come get the princess." The response was chaos. A dozen voices tried to speak at once, demanding explanations, verification, proof. Elena turned off the communicator and walked through the doorway. The inside of the vault was not what she expected. She had imagined something cold and alien, full of strange technology and dangerous defenses. Instead, she found a garden. Trees grew in neat rows, their leaves silver and gold. A stream flowed through the center of the space, its water crystal clear. The air smelled like flowers and fresh rain, and in the middle of it all, floating in a bubble of soft light, was the princess. Alindra Valshora was young and beautiful, with dark hair that floated around her face like a halo. Her eyes were closed, her expression peaceful. She looked like she was sleeping, dreaming pleasant dreams while the galaxy tore itself apart trying to rescue her. Elena approached the bubble carefully. She did not know how to turn off alien technology, but she had learned something important today. Sometimes the simplest solution was the right one. She reached out and touched the bubble with her gloved hand. It popped like soap. The princess fell gently to the ground, her eyes fluttering open. She looked confused, disoriented, like someone waking from a long nap. "Where am I?" she asked. "What happened?" "You were kidnapped," Elena said. "Some terrorist put you in here. But you're safe now. The door's open." Alindra sat up slowly, looking around at the garden with wonder. No one has been inside this place for thousands of years. "How did you get in?" Elena shrugged. The hinge was stuck. "I'd put some oil on it." The princess stared at her for a long moment. Then she started to laugh, a sound that was half relief and half disbelief. "Oil," she said. "The obsidian vault, the greatest mystery in the galaxy, and all it needed was oil." "Machines are like that sometimes," Elena said. "People make them too complicated in their heads. But at the end of the day, they're just machines. They want to work. You just have to help them." She helped the princess to her feet, and together they walked back toward the open door. Behind them, the garden continued to bloom, kept alive by systems that had functioned perfectly for 11,000 years, except for one tiny flaw in one tiny hinge dot when they emerged from the vault. Ships were already approaching. Elena could see the insignia of the Confederacy military on their hulls, along with medical vessels and diplomatic transports. The cavalry had arrived exactly when they were no longer needed. The first shuttle to land carried Dr. Strahl. The scientist ran toward them, her face a mixture of shock and joy. She grabbed the princess, checking her vital signs, asking rapid questions about her health and mental state. Then she turned to Elena. "How?" she demanded. "How did you open it?" "The left hinge," Elena said. "Something was stuck inside. I put a drop of oil in the gap, and it worked itself loose." Strahl's face went through several expressions in quick succession. Disbelief, denial, anger, and finally something that might have been humility. "That is not possible," she said. "We scanned that mechanism 1,000 times. There was nothing wrong with it." "Your scanners were looking for complicated problems," Elena said. "Sometimes the problem is simple." More ships arrived over the next few hours. Military commanders came to take Elena's statement. Government officials came to thank her. Reporters came to take her picture and ask questions she did not know how to answer. Through it all, Elena remained calm and quiet, answering when spoken to, but not volunteering anything extra. She was not used to attention. She had spent her whole life being invisible, just another worker doing a job that no one noticed until it was not done. The idea that she was now famous, that her face would be broadcast across 1,000 worlds, made her deeply uncomfortable. When the chaos finally died down, she found a quiet corner of the station and sat by herself, looking out at the obsidian vault. The door was still open, and teams of scientists were already preparing to explore its interior. They would spend years studying what they found, writing papers, building theories, and arguing about what it all meant. Elena did not care about any of that. She was thinking about the hinge, about the tiny flaw that had frozen the door for 11,000 years. The architects had been incredibly advanced, capable of building things that modern science could not even understand. But they had still made a mistake. They had still created something that could break, that was comforting, in a way. It meant that even gods were not perfect. It meant that the universe, for all its complexity, still followed rules that a simple mechanic could understand. The princess found her there an hour later. Alendra had changed into clean clothes and looked much better than she had in the garden. She sat down next to Elena without asking permission. "They say you broke protocol to come here," she said. "They say you stole a shuttle and flew to the vault alone, without weapons or backup." "That's true," Elena admitted. "Why?" Elena thought about the question for a moment. "Because I saw something that was wrong, and I thought I could fix it. That's what I do. I fix things." The princess smiled. "You know, my mother is going to want to meet you. She will probably offer you a title, lands, wealth. You could live like a noble for the rest of your life." Elena shook her head. "I wouldn't know what to do with any of that. I just want to go back to my ship and do my job." Alendra looked at her with something like wonder. "You really mean that, don't you?" "I'm a mechanic," Elena said simply. "It's all I've ever been. It's all I ever wanted to be." The princess nodded slowly, as if Elena had said something profound. Then she stood up and extended her hand. "Thank you, Elena Vasquez, for everything." Elena shook her hand, and then the princess was gone, whisked away by guards and officials to begin the long process of rebuilding the peace that her kidnapping had nearly destroyed. Elena stayed by the viewport for a while longer, watching the stars. Tomorrow, she would go back to the Wandering Star. She would check the engines, fix whatever needed fixing, and continue her quiet life among the cargo holds and engine rooms. The galaxy would move on, and eventually people would forget about the mechanic who had opened the impossible door, and that was fine with her. Fame was for other people. Elena Vasquez had work to do. The rescue of Princess Alindra should have been the end of the story. The peace treaty was signed 3 weeks later, ending a Cold War that had lasted a century. The voice of the Forgotten was captured within days, betrayed by his own followers who wanted nothing to do with a cause that had so obviously failed. The galaxy breathed a collective sigh of relief and prepared to move on. But the galaxy could not stop talking about Elena Vasquez. The Knights of the Void were the first to respond. Commander Blackwood, who had lost 17 of his finest warriors in the failed assault, gave a press conference in which he praised Elena's courage while carefully suggesting that his attack must have weakened the vault's defenses. "Our assault created stress fractures in the mechanism," he claimed. "The mechanics simply applied the final push." The clerics of the Ascending Path had their own explanation. High Cleric Morath declared that Elena was a vessel of divine will, chosen by the universe to succeed where others had failed. "Her mind was open in a way that ours was not," he announced. "She did not try to understand the vault. She simply listened to it. This is a profound spiritual lesson for us all." The scientific consortium published a paper suggesting that Elena had unconsciously intuited patterns from their published research, applying quantum mechanical principles without realizing it. Dr. Strahl, who had dismissed Elena so coldly before the rescue, became one of the paper's lead authors. Elena read all of these explanations and found them strange. She had not weakened anything, received divine guidance, or understood quantum mechanics. She had just seen a stuck hinge and put some oil on it. But she did not argue with any of them. Important people needed to believe that their skills mattered, even when they did not. She understood that the news stations played her story constantly. They showed footage of the failed assault, the cleric's meditation, the scientist's confusion. Then they showed Elena's shuttle approaching the vault alone, and the door opening for the first time in 11,000 years. They called her the miracle mechanic, the woman who opened the impossible door, the hero of KETH Ross-9. Elena hated all of it. She gave exactly 3 interviews before refusing to speak to the media again. In the first, she explained simply what she had done. In the second, she repeated the explanation when the interviewer seemed unable to believe it. In the third, she lost her patience. "Everyone wants there to be a secret," she said. "Some hidden knowledge that I possessed, some special power that let me succeed where others failed. But there is no secret. The door was stuck. I unstuck it. A child could have done the same thing if they had looked at the right place. But the knights, the clerics, the scientists," the interviewer protested. "They had so much power and knowledge. How could they all fail where you succeeded?" Elena thought about the question for a long moment. They were looking for complicated answers to a simple problem. The knights saw an enemy to defeat. The clerics saw a god to appease. The scientists saw a puzzle to solve. None of them saw what was actually there. And what was actually there? "A door," Elena said. "Just a door. And doors are supposed to open. When they don't, there's usually a simple reason. You just have to find it." The interview ended shortly after that. Elena went back to the Wandering Star and refused all further requests. But the galaxy was not done with her. 3 months after the rescue, the Therian Empress summoned Elena to the imperial palace. She went reluctantly, wearing her cleanest work clothes and carrying herself with the quiet dignity of someone who knew exactly who they were. The Empress was old and wise, with eyes that had seen empires rise and fall. She looked at Elena for a long time before speaking. "You saved my daughter's life," she said. "You saved the peace treaty. You may have saved billions of lives that would have been lost in war. What reward would you ask for this service?" Elena had thought about this question. She knew the Empress expected her to ask for money or land or a title. These were the things that heroes usually wanted. "Your Majesty," she said, "I would like to go back to my ship and continue doing my job. That is all I have ever wanted." The Empress smiled, as if Elena had passed some test she did not know she was taking. "That is exactly what I hoped you would say," the old woman said. "But I must insist on giving you something. It is tradition, and tradition matters." Elena thought about this. "Then give the reward to the families of the knights who died in the assault. They were braver than me. They just had the wrong tools." The Empress nodded slowly. "It will be done." 2 years later, a statue was erected on Earth, the homeworld of humanity. It stood in a plaza that had once been dedicated to great warriors and brilliant scientists. But this statue showed something different. A middle-aged woman in work clothes, holding a simple toolbox in one hand and a can of lubricant in the other. One drop of oil was frozen in the act of falling from the can spout. The inscription at the base read, "The universe is vast and complex and full of wonders. But sometimes what it needs most is someone who pays attention to the small things." Elena did not attend the dedication ceremony. She was busy at the time, fixing a faulty coolant pump on a colony world that no one had ever heard of. The pump was making a strange noise, and strange noises always meant trouble. But across the galaxy, the statue became a symbol of something that many species had forgotten. The fancy technologies and advanced powers were important, yes. But so were the simple skills, the practical knowledge, the ability to look at a problem and see it clearly for what it was. Humanity had always been a young species among the stars. They were not the strongest or the wisest or the most advanced. They had no psychic powers or genetic enhancements or technology that could bend the laws of physics. They were just people, ordinary people who lived and worked and died like anyone else. But they had something that the older species had lost. They had the ability to see simple solutions to complex problems. They had the patience to listen when everyone else was too busy talking. They had hands that knew how to work and minds that understood that the universe, for all its wonder, was still made of parts that could be understood. The architects had built wonders that would last for millions of years. But even their greatest creation could be stopped by a stuck hinge and opened by a drop of oil. This was not a weakness of the architects. It was a truth about the universe. Everything breaks eventually, and when it does, someone needs to know how to fix it. Elena Vasquez died 40 years after the rescue, peacefully in her sleep aboard the same ship she had served for most of her life. She never became rich or famous by her own standards. She never stopped being a mechanic. Her crew found her the next morning, her hand resting on an engine coupling that she had been adjusting the night before. But her legacy lived on. Across the galaxy, young people of every species learned about the mechanic who had opened the obsidian vault. They learned that brute force was not always the answer, that ancient wisdom could be wrong, that the smartest approach was sometimes the simplest one. They learned that paying attention to small things could change the course of history. And on 100 worlds. In 1,000 workshops and engine rooms and repair bays, mechanics and engineers and fixers of all kinds kept a can of lubricant somewhere special, not because they expected to open any ancient doors, but because it reminded them of something important, Sometimes the universe does not need heroes. Sometimes it just needs someone who knows how to fix things. And that, perhaps, was humanity's greatest gift to the stars.